Hi, all. I am Rachel Jones, a sales coach and fractional sales manager. I'm excited to have you with the show today. And our guest for the day is Teresa. Thank you for being here. And would you give a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Rachel, thanks for having me. So I help organizations save time and money, solving problems and creating solutions in a nutshell.
Perfect. Well, and I know we're here to talk about like unleashing team potential. So I would love it if our audience has any questions that they throw it in the comments below, and Teresa and I will get to them as we see them. So, Teresa, what kind of inspired you to go into team optimization, and how did your experience lead you to starting your own business?
Well, I've been in and around project management and program management in large corporations for about 35 years.
Hmm.
And over the course of that time, if you can imagine that long ago, there wasn't a lot of structure or practices really put around these things that were very well defined, at least not in the company I was working for early on. And so while I was being called upon to make these very large changes come to fruition with the teams I worked with, I didn't have a lot of tools or a lot of structure given to me to use to make that happen. I would be given a date and something to get done, not knowing whether that date was realistic. They would say, here's your budget. I wouldn't know if that amount of money was actually going to cover everything we needed to do, and told just go get it done. So out of necessity and survival in my corporate job, I kind of am a resourceful person, and I just sat out to create the tools I needed and the practices that I needed to follow in order to make it a little more predictable and something that would enable us to get to the goal line. Um, Along the way, things came along that actually operationalized a lot of the things I was doing. I mean, at the beginning, there wasn't really a big push for project managers to have certifications like through the Project Management Institute. They were just really getting steam behind them. And so that wasn't something my company really endorsed or made us do. But later on, I did come to understand that a lot of what I was doing aligned with what they had been advocating for. So I, was totally following a lot of the things that everyone else had figured out were also necessary.
Hmm.
As progress happened, many methodologies came along, yet still, even though, PMI and Agile and Lean and all these other methodologies sought to solve the problem of shoring up all the gaps in how to manage scope when you're making big changes in a business, how to make sure the team knows what to do when, and how to provide management with the reporting they need, they still were missing certain key elements that I found made all the difference in whether they got done and how quickly it took them to get there, and whether everyone felt just depleted of all morale by the end of it. And the things that I did made that difference. So I would put them on top of whatever methodology I was told to follow. And my teams ended up doing things that others weren't able to. And I'd be asked, well, why is your team able to accomplish this when others couldn't? And I'd say, well, I do these extra things. I've created this framework, and it turned out to become what I call now the team optimization program. It's just a collection of best practices and tools that I created out of necessity in order to get the job done the best way I saw it could happen. And over the course of that 35 years, I refined this program. And in my last role, I had bigger and bigger and more complex programs handed to me because I was known as the person that could bring order to chaos.
Hmm.
And I took pride in that. It was nice to know I was the go-to person. I'd be handed these things that were quite a mess, to be
Yeah.
honest. I kind of say it was like being thrown behind enemy lines, like parachuting in and having to solve, the problems. Not like I'm all that, but it was like having to clean up. And I was able to bring some calm to the situation and get teams to settle down and give them what they needed in order to get to the finish line. And after being passed over for promotions I was in a line for a good 4 years, actually already doing the job, I was
Yeah.
again passed over, and I found that if I really wanted to accelerate my career, I needed to look for a different way for upward
Mhm.
mobility. And so I sought out on my own in the middle of the pandemic in August of 2020, because that's the best time to start a business.
Of course so. Um, well, and I think a lot of folks don't realize what a good project manager can bring to the table with their business and how they can get streamlined and meet their deadlines because they think, oh, we're going to do this really large project and everybody's going to just figure it out on their own. And the reality is, you then get scope creep, you get people who are not pulling their same weight as some of the other folks, and people get frustrated. You don't give them enough resources to be able to get the job done. So out of curiosity, when you are talking to businesses and they're like, well, we're not sure if we need a project manager or not, I feel like most businesses need somebody who's going to take up that helm. But what would you say to those companies that are kind of thinking about whether or not this is a good fit for them on getting a project manager involved?
Well, I would just ask them who is going to answer for you whether the timeline is doable, and
Hmm.
who's going to provide you the insights to tell you where the obstacles lie that are going to get in the way of that happening.
Hmm.
Someone has to be in a position to have that overall line of sight to things. And
Hmm.
who's going to clear away the obstacles that the team encounters so that they don't get bogged down in them and they can keep moving forward. I wouldn't say an engineer or a developer's greatest asset is in communicating necessarily those types of
Right.
things to management. They have another talent and they need to be able to focus on that.
Hmm. Now, can you kind of break down how the team optimization program helps enhance those team performances and business outcomes?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, it's a collection of best practices and tools that I created over the course of a long time. I really started this journey by embracing and getting out there what I consider the underpinnings, the foundation of collaboration, which is people being able to play well together. And
Hmm.
that's my collaborate like a rock star keynote that I brought to fruition. And because I have a background also in performing arts as a musician, I decided to package it with a backdrop of music, because music is the most collaborative art form.
Hmm.
So we start there, and that really is an offering that's great for, say, an association, someone that, or an association that serves those in the community of program management, team leadership, especially in the financial services and technology space. And that lays a foundation of civility, communication, and caring, which I think are the foundation for collaboration in the team space.
Hmm.
Beyond that, though, there's more than just people getting along. Then they have to understand how to operate. And I have a set of accelerators and best practices then that I work with a business to understand which of those are the things that are going to raise the performance of their team, because not every organization needs everything. Some are doing well in team um, talent management, and others do better in, say, budget management. And
Right.
so we have to look at what is happening with the current teams. What are they struggling with? What do they need more of? And I actually come into a business and ask them to speak to their teams for a good 2 weeks at least, sometimes more, depending on the size of the team.
Hmm.
And I gain an understanding from them of what they feel the obstacles are to them getting something done more quickly, what could help them to elevate that performance. And so once we've figured out what the opportunities are, I design a program for them, and I take that back to the executives and say, here are the things that are going to move your team forward, to allow you to transform your team to a high performing team, a top performing team, as I call it. And some of those accelerators involve how the executive sponsor will engage with the team.
Mhm.
What type of interaction are they going to have? What is their presence in the project? How are they going to be online, ready to knock down the bureaucracy that stands in the way of progress as it happens, to not allow teams to get bogged down in those things? How are we going to track progress? How is the team going to know where to be, when, what to deliver, and who's waiting on them? Because that, a lot of times, is where things fall apart, is you have
Mhm.
one team that isn't delivering something, another team's waiting for them, and they can't go anywhere.
Mhm.
Even just figuring out who the right people to have in the room are is one of those
Right.
big gap areas I found that none of the other methodologies really satisfy. So
Mhm.
often I would be given a program, and the first thing I would do is say, okay, who do we have on the team? And I'd see gaps, whether it was in the talent, the skill sets needed to develop the solution, or those on the business side that needed to convey what the solution needs to be. Because
Right.
sometimes, the technology team thinks they know what the business needs, but if the wrong business people, if you don't have everybody from the business in the room that needs to be there,
Mhm.
things can be missed, or a solution can be developed that really doesn't match what the customer needs. So, all of these different accelerators then make up that team optimization program. And I present those through what I call rock shops because, well, workshops are boring, but rock shops are fun. And that keeps the whole backdrop of the music theme in
Mhm.
play because, again, music provides a perfect example of team collaboration, getting to a result. And a lot of people may not think of a band as a business, but they
Mhm.
actually are. If you think of Taylor Swift, her
Oh,
organization, one
absolutely.
of the biggest businesses in the world, right?
Mhm.
And they're not going to make beautiful music or get to a result if they
Mhm.
don't collaborate and work together well.
I think one of my experiences working with a project manager is that they help kind of create the expectations, the efficiencies, the boundaries. Because if you have some owner that comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to grow $500,000," that's great, fantastic, love that for you. Are we hiring more staff? Do we have the account management in place to handle that? Do we have the players in the place? And what boundaries are we doing around their time? Because I think a lot of times meetings can just be a time suck. So one of the examples you and I chatted about before this conversation was I had run into a client that they don't do a no meeting Wednesday where everybody can just focus and get their work done. And I think that that was a brilliant idea. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, are those some of the things that you bring to the table where you can have people come to you and say, I can't get my work done.
Yeah.
How can I be more efficient? Or how can I set better boundaries in this so that I can get accomplished what we need to accomplish in that time?
Yeah, and some of it depends on what level of program are you dealing with. The larger the effort, the more leverage you have in
Hmm.
terms of saying no to extraneous requests that are just, like you said, time sucks. If you sit in a role where you're giving transformational programs, large, complex deliverables that involve big teams, then you're being given the purse strings of a very large budget for one, and a lot of resources. So you need to take, that into account and be a good steward of that.
Right.
Which means you have a little leverage there to say, look, I can't be in 20 meetings telling you how this project is going, but I do provide a format for you to join me each week and find out where things are in this program and learn what you need to learn to take back to your portion of the business.
Hmm.
So there's a couple things that live within the team optimization program to satisfy what you're talking about. One is that team cadence
Hmm.
concept where everyone knows, when are we going to meet, what types, or what is the time frame I have each week to do
Hmm.
work, when do I need to be in meetings? When
Mhm.
do I need to collaborate with my teams on specific work tasks? So that everyone knows what to expect when, and they're not feeling like it's just an interruption to their day. They feel like they're actually able to focus when they need to, like the no Wednesday meeting scenario that you talked about.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, kind of going off of that, can you share success story, a transformational story where you were brought in, you used the team optimizational program, and it helped kind of create those efficiencies and collaboration within a company?
Sure. There was a effort that I was involved in with a client, and it was a one of those transformational efforts. It was replatforming their retirement systems,
Mhm.
which involves a lot of complexity and a lot of potential impact. There was also an impending end of a contract for the existing platform. So there was a drop dead date, if
Mhm.
you will. If they didn't get off of it, they were going to face large fines, in the millions of dollars.
Oof.
And that was going to have, that was obviously a hefty price to pay. So they had been trying to get this effort done for over 7 years, but because of various breakdowns in the team collaboration and the technology space and whatnot, they had stalled and they had stopped and started and you know, re vamp the whole thing, and still they weren't getting it done. My team was brought in and we leveraged the practices that I was used to following to make
Mhm.
sure that teams understood the work in front of them. We understood what gaps there were to getting that done. And bottom line, we finished both of their replatforms that had failed over 7 years in a year and a half.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and their CEO, or CTO, sorry, received an award that year for CTO of the year across the entire organization that was given to him by the chairman of the board. So it was a big deal.
That's amazing. I hope you got a shout out in his acceptance speech.
Yeah, well, I hope I did too, but I wasn't there for that because I was a contractor, I was long
Yeah,
gone.
that's fair. But no, that's wonderful that people can really get those balls moving. And I think also sometimes it's that concept of you can't see the forest through the trees. Like if you are in the weeds in your own organization, there is a lot of value of bringing consultants like you or me to say, like, hey, you think this has been communicated. They have no idea what you're talking about. How do we bridge that gap and make sure that what you want is what's happening here?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, you get so close to something that you can no longer see what the flaws might be within that
mhm.
program or whatever. And sometimes that third set of eyes they're a fresh set of eyes, they can see something that's so obvious to a newcomer to the scene, right? That you're just blinded to. You become, like they say, nose blind when it's a scent, and it's kind of the same concept. So it can be beneficial to bring in that new perspective,
Mhm.
and to challenge the status quo. I mean, that was something I always took on.
Mhm.
People say, well, we've always done it that way. I'm like, why?
Yeah. Why?
I'm like the annoying child. Why,
Yeah.
mommy? And I would
I
just keep
love that.
saying
I'm
why.
the why kid. I've always explained myself as the why kid, but why do we do it that way? Why can't we try it a different way?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and I'd get a lot of, well, because we just have. I'm like, can we get beyond? I mean, can you go a little
right.
deeper on that and help me understand? You know,
Yep.
so a lot of times they realize, oh wow, well maybe we could do it different, and it starts to open up their thinking and get them to approach things differently, and it's really rewarding. People feel like unleashed all of a
Right.
sudden, where before they might have not realized they were shackled.
Exactly. Well, and I'm sure from an employee standpoint, it's a better option with employee retention because you might have somebody who's really performing and somebody else who's underperforming. And so these folks are getting burned out and they're not getting the recognition or the tools that they need or the support they need from somebody who's maybe performing at a lower level. And so
Yeah,
then you lose your good staff if you keep
that's right.
them in that cycle of, hey, we have to do this big push, but then you feel like you failed because somebody else didn't do their job.
Well, absolutely. There's nothing more frustrating for a high performer than to put their heart and soul into something and just have it, fall apart.
Right.
And 70% of projects fail. This is still
Mhm.
a real statistic. It's
That's
been
wild.
that way as long as I can remember. And why should we accept that? It's totally unnecessary.
Mhm.
And when you have those failures, your high performers are the ones that are going to get frustrated. And whether they end up, not staying engaged in their work, maybe they look for work elsewhere, you lose
Mhm.
them and they are extremely expensive to replace.
Mhm. Do you think it's the reason that 70% is failing is due to like scope creep because they don't have an actual plan and they're not setting boundaries around their time? Like, what do you think, out of your experience, some of those failures are attributed to?
Well, there's a lot of different varieties of that. Scope creep is a big one. You have to put some parameters around what questions are you going to solve for.
Mhm.
That's what I always ask. What question are we answering with this solution?
Mhm.
And if someone says, "Well, we need to add this to a program," well, does it answer the question we're trying to answer, or is that outside the bounds of that? And if you keep things kind of simple, you're going to
Mhm.
get to that finish line. Um, so scope is definitely a big problem for a lot of teams and a lot of efforts that are in play. Another one that I think I mentioned earlier were gaps in the team. And I
Mhm.
can't tell you, it seems so obvious. Like, okay, you've got your developers, you've got your business people, you've got your testers and your business analyst and whatnot, your user interface designers and all of that. Well, did anybody ask sales? Did anybody ask
Yep.
marketing if this
Yeah.
timeline is going to work for the campaigns they have planned to use it on?
Mhm.
Is anybody communicating with the operations team to make sure that these new functions can be used by the people on the front line?
Mhm.
And so often they're just like, oh, afterthought. Wow, I didn't even
Yep.
think of that. I guess we need to get them in the room.
Mhm.
And then when you get those people in the room, all of a sudden you start uncovering all these unknowns. It's like, well, wait a minute, I need this thing in order to be able to tell the customer that when they call them and ask a question. Oh, well, we got to put that on the screen. And there's all these
Yeah.
little nuances that show up, and they do become scope that has to be adopted.
Right.
So the idea is get the right people in the room, get a good understanding of what is needed. And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, you can't solve world hunger. No, we're not solving world hunger, and we're not getting embroiled in detail here.
Right.
You have to have a clear understanding of what you're delivering, and then you can break it down into smaller increments to deliver over the
Right.
course of time and
Mhm.
deliver with high quality
Yeah. It's so
and
funny when you
predictability.
said, yeah, it's so funny when you said sometimes people don't get the right people in the room because I actually was just with a client. They have an industry specific software. And as an afterthought, they decided to add a CRM for like sales pipeline and everything like that. And that's great. They're industry experts and they tried to think of what a salesperson would do, but I don't believe that they actually talked to a sales human
Mhm.
in this cycle. And so I was like, I can't pull this report. This is the type of like view that I would want in this. I can't understand where my team is doing this. And they were like, can you talk to our project engineer? And I was like,
Yeah.
absolutely I can,
Oh,
because I
yeah.
just don't know what you don't know, right?
Right. And
Um,
speaking of don't know what you don't know, here's a great one. This is one of the ones I know frustrates teams all around the world. An
mhm.
executive has this wonderful idea and they say, okay, go get it done. I need it by X date. Now
Mhm.
they're throwing a date out there because, they're leaders. That's their job.
Right.
Plant, put a stake in the ground. But is it realistic or not?
Mhm.
Maybe, maybe not. A lot
Mhm.
of teams feel so much pressure because that information came from an executive. That request came from an executive. Well, we have to make that happen come hell or high water, whether it makes sense or not. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, wait a minute. Are you setting that executive up for success by
Right.
trying to, jam it in there by that date, no matter what's
Mhm.
right or wrong about it? And, you've got two sides of this. You've got the teams that are afraid to push back,
Right.
And you've got the executives that say, well, just go figure it out and get it done, regardless of whether it's realistic. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where a good program manager can
Mm-hmm.
sit in that seat of understanding both sides of that equation and
Yeah.
saying, look, you can certainly have this thing by then, but you have some tough decisions to make. We need
Mm-hmm.
either more time, more resources,
Mm-hmm.
or less to get done. And
Right.
those are the levers that every program manager has at their disposal to help any executive and any team accomplish their goal. But they
Yeah.
can't all be constants. They can't.
Right.
So, if an executive wants to dig in their heels, they can do that, but they're setting them and their team up for failure.
Yeah.
And any team that feels like they have to try to make something happen that is just completely unrealistic
Mm-hmm.
is not only digging their own grave, they're again setting their executive up for failure, and they're not going to appreciate that. I
Yeah.
actually have a great story where I showed up at a client, and the whole team was telling me, oh, we have to have this done by October. I said, really? That's the date you were given? Yes, that's the date, and that's what we're doing, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay. And I look at the scope, I look at the work that requires to deliver it, and I'm like, mathematically, it just doesn't work with the number
Right.
of people we have in seats. And so I had a very methodical, math-based kind of, I'd say, scientific way of determining that. And my calculation said it's going to be done in February. That's just
Right.
the reality. And so I went back to the executive. I said, we're looking like February rather than October. Of course, they blew their stack. And I said,
Yeah.
I totally understand. And you have some options at your disposal.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, okay, well, what would it take if we were to get this done, if we wanted to get this done by October? I said, well, October is, that's pretty aggressive. But if you want to get it done, you can
Mm-hmm.
either cut these pieces out of your scope,
Mm-hmm.
or and they're like, wait a minute, no, we don't want to do that. We need the whole thing. I'm like,
Okay.
okay, so you need the whole thing, so we can't cut scope. You want it by October, so we can't change the date. So then the only lever I have to offer you is I need to have 42 more people sitting in seats developing software tomorrow.
That's
And
wow.
they're like, well, we can't do that. I
Like,
said,
well, then this is what it
I,
takes to get you
yeah,
there.
I said, I didn't think so. I figured that was unrealistic. And that's why I would recommend that you either
Mhm.
reconsider the scope that you're trying to deliver by October, or you consider a later date, because
Yeah.
those are the things that set you and your team up for success. And
Mm-hmm.
they did eventually decide to go with a February um, deliverable date, but I gave them another little way to kind of appease some of the
Yeah.
board that was kind of at their backs clamoring and pushing them. I
Mhm.
said, why don't we deliver a pilot piece? That's this little sliver of functionality that you can show them something real is happening. And we'll do that, say, in November, right before the break for, the holidays. And we did that.
Okay.
And so that satisfied some of the pressure they were feeling.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great because then it's win-win for everybody. I think when you have these insurmountable goals that you're trying to reach,
Yeah.
I think about it just from a sales perspective. If I tell a sales rep that their commission is going up, double, half the time they just are defeated before they even get started. They're like, well, that's not even doable. So I'm just gonna like not even give it that much effort. Versus
Right.
when you set people up for like them to be able to have success, you're way more likely to get those goals met. Um, Now, as we wrap this up, I'm curious, what is one actionable tip that you would give business leaders that are looking to optimize their teams, besides obviously calling you and hiring you?
Well, that is number one. No. So honestly, I would suggest that you look at answering the right question, making sure the team understands the very finite questions that they need to develop solutions to answer.
Mhm.
Because that is the beginning of that whole parameter you're going to place around the scope. If they anchor everything to that, then you're not going to be faced with so many overruns in budget and time.
Mhm. Perfect. Well, thank you, Teresa, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. All of
Yeah.
your information is going to be linked below. So as people want to reach out to you, I would encourage them to check out her website and reach out via LinkedIn. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. It was fun. Appreciate it.
Have a lovely day, y'all.
See ya.